everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this edition of NRI Talks. We hope you're all as excited as we are for what is set to be a very interesting interview and discussion. Now, before we get started, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank all of our viewers tuning in from all over the world. And a special thank you goes out to the amazing team of Naif Al-Rajhi Investments for creating this opportunity and supporting entrepreneurs all over the world who are looking to truly make a difference. Now, for those watching, if you're in the business of food and beverage or simply looking to get into that space, then trust me when I say this, you're going to want to sit back, get comfortable, and really focus on this interview as we are joined today by an inspirational guest, a success story and true entrepreneur and expert in the field of food and beverage. Joining us today from Dubai is the CEO and owner of Jones the Grocer, Mr. Yunib Siddiqui. Let's take a look at today's guest.
I was a GM, and I was also the first store manager, and I was also the guy opening the shutters and closing them and running the pass and carrying the dishes. So I did everything, and I didn't know any other way. And that was the other challenge, is that a lot of people didn't understand why I was doing this. You know, why don't you have somebody doing this? Why don't you have somebody doing that? You know, that mindset was a bit difficult over here. For me, it was second nature because I'd always run a business that you know was easy. We start every day by baking our breads, cakes and pastries fresh in store. It's just one of the many things that sets us apart from other restaurants. We're more than just serving breakfast, lunch and dinner. We do that too, but we also do all this other wonderful stuff, like we do gorgeous cheese, we do cooking classes, master classes, barista classes, you name it, we do it. If you love food, this is the place to come to.
Joining us today from Dubai is the CEO and owner of Jones the Grocer, Mr. Yunib Siddiqui. Mr. Yunib, thanks for joining us.
Hey Omar, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, now, Mr. Siddiqui, very quickly, give us a quick rundown on what exactly is Jones the Grocer, but most importantly, what makes it a success?
So we are a restaurant, we're a cheese room, we're a charcuterie, so cold cuts, meats, we're a deli, we do siphon coffee, we do specialty coffee, we have an open kitchen, so you can see everything that's going on, and of course we have a grocery as well. So there's lots going on within our stores all the time.
Well, I've had the privilege of actually walking into one of your stores, and I got to tell you, it was an amazing experience, to be honest with you. Tell us, how did you get into the field of food and beverage?
I wasn't really in this business actually. I was in the home interiors business, a different business altogether in London. Stumbled across the brand in a magazine called Wallpaper. Happened to be in Singapore and checked it out and absolutely loved it. I was kind of like a hobby cook. Probably the wrong reason to get into this business, I guess, if you look at it from just purely from a passion project perspective, but I really wanted to do something different. I was looking to wind down this business I had in London, saw this amazing concept, just opened its first store in Singapore, and actually just fell in love with it. And I was trying to find ways of doing it myself, and then I thought, listen, let's just approach the owner in Australia. I got in touch with him, sent him a fax. In those days, it was 2009, 8 actually, and then we kind of met up in Singapore, and the rest is history.
Excellent. Now, I'm really excited because we have entrepreneurs, business owners within the field of F&B and a few that are not in that space that are joining us today. So I do want to take a moment and thank all of our viewers for tuning in. With that being said, the next question that I wanted to ask you is, what are the elements, and this is a very important piece of information for the audience that are in the space that are looking to make a success out of their brand, what are the elements that makes Jones the Grocer a successful brand?
So I think one of the main things that really captured me at the outset, I was enamored by this incredible brand, was how visual, how theatrical it is in terms of food. You know, it's almost like you're sitting in a cinema watching so much going on. And I think that's the special point. You can be sitting in the restaurant. On your right-hand side, there's a guy slicing meat. There's somebody in the cheese room, you know, picking out some amazing blue cheese or an egg cheddar. And then you can walk just 5 yards down from where you're sitting, and you'll see an open kitchen with chefs doing all their stuff, cooking and making a risotto or whatever it is, a guy making coffee in the middle, a baker baking, and somebody shopping with a basket. There's so much going on in this business all the time that, it's almost like entertainment, it's visualtainment, food theater, whatever you want to call it.
Right. So is it the fact that you guys provide so many different options? Is it the diversity that actually contributes to making it a success?
I think the days of mono dining, where you go just to eat, are on the wane. They're declining. My view is that everything these days is about entertainment. You can't even get away from your phone for a second. You're constantly looking for something to grab your attention. And I think the reason why this brand works, answering your question very directly, is because it really entertains all the senses. Absolutely. And that's what this is all about.
All right. Now, a lot of our viewers have actually submitted questions, and one of the most frequent questions that have come in are from business owners in food and beverage who are looking to expand. So before we get into all those questions, tell us a little bit more. How did you manage to drive that expansion from 1 to 2 to 3 and so on locations regionally and across the world? How did you manage to do that successfully?
Look, it was always a hard graft. The first store was a significant challenge. If in terms of planning, putting together the business plan. I mean, one of the key things was trying to put together the plan for the first store absolutely right. Really working through the business plan, sense checking it, talking to people, getting as much outside opinion as possible so I could sense check every single assumption that exists in the business. And once the assumptions were sense checked, then actually putting together the model and then planning, and then going to the stage where you actually start to actually recruit people all the way to the beginning, and when the store actually starts trading. I think that was the key, the bedrock of actually getting to opening more and more stores. And once the first store was trading and operationally viable, because it was always viable from day one, but once we realized it was a viable operating business and it was meeting, in fact, exceeding budget, we then put in place a plan to roll out the systems that we put in place, document them, put together a proper operating system, and then roll it out across multiple locations. Obviously, there was funding requirements, which I may not go down this route, but once we knew we had an operating model that worked, we were then able to raise funding and concurrently hire people and put together a really tight operating system that governed the recipes and how we would have consistency across the network.
Excellent. Now, since we're talking about locations and expansion, I want to take a small step backwards and let's talk about one of the first locations. I mean, you've got a really intriguing story behind this. I was absolutely fascinated by it. And the reason I want you to cover this is for a lot of the viewers who tend to have certain oversights. Again, what I admire about this was the attention to detail and how far out of your way you've gone to be able to pinpoint some elements. So tell us about your experience very briefly. How did you select your first location, and what are some of the observations that you had on that?
Somebody pointed out this location to me and said, listen, check out this location, Yunib. And I went to this location, I had a look at it, and I was really couldn't understand why. I was kind of flummoxed by the idea that why has everybody ignored this location? What's the reason why nobody's going there? And I just scratched my hair. I had much more hair than I have now. So I really couldn't understand. I'm pulling my hair out, going around the whole of Abu Dhabi, asking people questions. Nobody knew this building even existed. I ended up then spending time in the car park, which is kind of an odd thing to do. But Building B had a 5 or 6 level car park, and I parked my car in there, and I had a ticker, and I started counting cars, how many cars are coming in, just to get an idea of footfall, because there wasn't any latent footfall, like it's not like the West where you have people walking past your location. So the only way to do this was to sit in the car park. So I started counting cars, and I figured out that 90% of the cars going in there were actually German cars, high-end, Porsche, Cayennes or whatever, and Mercedes and Audis and so on. And so I kind of came to a decision that, on my ticker, I had something like 400 or 500 cars going in and out of this place, all high-end cars. And then I went into building A, which there were two buildings in this location, Al Mamura A and B. And building A, there was a travel agent, a captive travel agent, sat behind the security barrier. And I went up to this guy and I said, listen, how many tickets do you issue in a day? He said maybe 300-400 tickets on average, in every couple of days. So I said, great. I said, so how many economy tickets? He said, none. I said, how many business? He said about 80 to 90%. I said, how many first class? He said the rest. And so I sort of immediately knew that I was onto something here. Sure. And then I started investigating the tenants, and I realized, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed's office was going in there, the executive council was going in there. And then I started to realize that people like Al-Shai who'd seen the site for Starbucks and Cafe Nero and some of these big international brands, they hadn't done their homework. They hadn't actually paid any attention to the tenant list or any of this stuff. And they were obviously just enamored by the mall culture that exists in the UAE, in the region, and they wanted to go into a mall and they just put the site to one side. And so I met with Mohammed Mubarak, who is Khaldoon's brother, Khaldoon, chairman of Manchester City, and he had obviously been to the store in Sydney, the Jones store in Sydney, and he was all over it. He said, listen, you've got to open over here. This is amazing. We want you in here. And I actually managed to negotiate a fit-out contribution, not just verbally with him, but later on with the Eldar team. And that was absolutely incredible because that fulfilled my business plan. I managed to fill the gap in funding, that I had a small gap in funding with the fit-out the capex contribution the landlord was willing to provide me. But as soon as I got back to Dubai, my partners pulled out because they said Abu Dhabi wasn't sexy enough. This wasn't the place to be in. You've got to be in Dubai. So then I was left with a big gap in funding, and I had to go and find the money. And in the end, one of the shareholders, my other partners, stepped in and put the money in, and we then built out this amazing first store.
Speaking of locations again, and speaking of scaling the business or opening multiple locations for our viewers, when you expanded the operation, how did you guys manage, or did you succeed in maintaining the standards after the expansion? How did you ensure, consistency, food quality, brand identity, and other elements like performance across all the locations?
So one of the first things we did was trying to start putting together some sort of an operations manual that could govern the service standards in the business. This was very much an early document we put together, trying to tell staff how to talk to customers, how to greet customers, what kind of recipes, starting to document recipes, put together a health and safety guide, cleaning guides. So in a sense, when we opened multiple stores down the line, we actually had 5 stores signed up within 6 months, 6 to 7 months. We wanted to be sure that when we hire people, they actually had a mission, a vision. All these things were all standardized. So when we hired them, we actually tried to explain to them, listen, this is what this brand is about. Here is a document, read it. We're going to train you on what you're going to do. And when you arrive in the business, you'll have a fairly good idea as to how this business is run, and there'll be on the ground training as well. And that's kind of what we did. We built this brand with the sort of systems in mind as the business grew.
Absolutely great. I mean, it's very interesting to know that one of the things that I personally made a mistake with in the past, being in the field of food and beverage, is not having enough standard operation manuals and systems in place, and that created a lot of inconsistency across the locations that we had. Now, many food and beverage businesses tend to fail within the first few months of operation. What, in your opinion, what are the reasons behind these failures? What are the top 3 elements that contribute to that, do you think?
I think the first thing, and one thing that I always lived by, is actually, at least during the first 2 years of the business operations, when we had 3 to 5 stores, I was always in the stores. I from running the pass, in the first store, for example, I was, buying gas cylinders. We couldn't get credit accounts. Nobody gave us credit because, in the UAE, it's all relationship based. Nobody knew who I was. I was carrying food from the pass, opening the store every morning, arriving at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. in the morning, stocking up the shelves with the team. You've really got to be hands-on. And I think one of the reasons for failure is that people don't want to roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty. You need to understand the problems before you can fix them. And the only way you can understand the problems as a business owner is to actually be in the thick of them. If you're not in the thick of the problems, you won't find a solution. And I think the most important lesson there is to actually, be involved in your business. That's the first thing. The second thing is hiring your team, your senior team. I think it's very, very important to be involved in that hiring process, so that you understand the people that are going to lead your business going forward are on the same wavelength as you. And the third thing, I think, is to constantly look at the way the business is performing against the business plan that you developed and you worked on very hard at the beginning. Because you know what, business plans are there as a yardstick. They're not there necessarily for you to follow to the T. You've got to constantly adjust them. You got to look at your cost, you got to look at your sales, and you got to constantly be nimble and work through your business plan and see how things have changed along the way. I think those three things together, along with obviously just being involved in your business and providing a really good service, customer service standards, I think are key for any food and beverage business.
Excellent. Now let's talk marketing. How important is marketing and advertising in today's extremely competitive market? And the reason why I ask you that is because you guys have been known to be a little bit untraditional with your ways. So tell us a little bit about your strategies when it comes to going from offline to online. I know you guys converted to digital. You've utilized technology, but also I know you guys have done some untraditional things with some of the classes, let's say. Walk us through that, please.
Absolutely. So I mean, one of the first things, we were never very proactive with traditional marketing when we first started the business. We always built our business around the local community. That was one of the key things. And that required a lot of, first of all, good service standards, great food, which leads in word of mouth. So we became fairly well known in the community very quickly that we operated in. And because we were in this amazing building in Abu Dhabi, a lot of bankers came there, bankers, private equity people, M&A people. So they'd go back to Dubai and tell people, listen, we went to this amazing store, it has a cheese room. I mean, we were the only cafe with a grocery in the UAE at the time, combined together as a sort of cafe come grocery. So people started talking about it. So that was the first route. Then we started doing things like cooking classes to engage the community. And then we were lucky that Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed came into the store, which was absolutely incredible. And all of these things together resulted in incredible word of mouth about the brand and created a real point of difference that didn't really exist, in the UAE at the time, particularly in a standalone location, not in a mall. Attracting people, having queues at lunchtime. We had people coming from Dubai just to check us out. People like Emar, who never wanted to give us the time of day, suddenly started calling me up saying, hey, listen, we've heard about you. Do you want to lease a site? So things really started to pick up.
Absolutely. Now, one of the interesting questions that we've had earlier come in, and I really want to ask you this, is how does a business owner control the cost versus the expenses without sacrificing on things like quality or revenues and without, having to eliminate things like marketing budgets?
I think the first thing is that marketing is never sacrificed. The most important point is, I think when you end up in tight situations, most accountants will come along and tell you that let's cut marketing, let's remove it off the P&L line. It shouldn't be a cost item. You got to reduce it. So that's the biggest mistake you can possibly make. I think marketing has to continue as a P&L item, irrespective of how difficult times are. For example, during COVID now, it's extremely important. In terms of expenses, managing revenue. I mean, expenses. Really, you've got to develop a business plan and you've got to look at your expenses as a percentage of revenue. And I think it's super important to look at that with your senior team and be completely transparent with your senior team. The other challenge in this business is, particularly businesses in this region, is that people aren't transparent with their profit and loss accounts. You need to be transparent. You can only save cost and increase revenue when your team actually fully understand what the numbers are. If you don't understand the numbers, no one can help you. And that's the most important point, is that you need to be transparent, to show them what the revenues are, what the gross margin is, what the costs are. Once they have a buy-in on that, you can then get an execution.
Now, it's really it's really interesting what you say with expenses having to be a certain percentage of the revenue. So for those watching that are in the business or own their businesses, what is that standard? Where should the expenses be roughly in comparison to the revenue, in your opinion?
It depends on the country where you are. Labor costs, for example, in this region sit around anything from 18 up to 23% of revenue. Gross operating margins, or GOP, which is sometimes what people call it, sits around, if you're a pure food business, around 70%. So I mean, most people aim for a bottom line in casual dining of around 15 to 20%. That's a wish.
Okay.
But the problem is landlord fixed overhead, which is generally rent in particular, tends to vary anything between 10 to 25%, depending on how aggressive your landlord is and where you're based. If your rent's anywhere above 15%, it's highly unlikely you're going to clear an EBITDA or free cash flow of more than 10 to 15%. Very, very tough. Sure. In this environment. So as a ballpark number, one should aim for around 15%, EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation. Okay. Landlord fixed costs of around 10% ideally, 12 at a maximum, 15 at the very, very high end. And I guess gross operating profit, if it's purely food, around 70 to 75%.
Now, you touched on a few minutes ago on COVID-19, and that's definitely a topic or a subject that's nearly impossible to escape these days. And obviously, a lot of people within the business have, without a doubt, gone through some very difficult times. We've seen a lot of small businesses, even medium and large-sized businesses, not only suffer, but many of them closing down. What was your strategy in order to cope with the challenging times or COVID-19?
Look, I would say in order of magnitude, the first thing is cash is king. And you need to preserve cash. And the most important thing that you could think about right now is to make sure you have cash today for cash tomorrow. If you do not have cash tomorrow, you might as well forget about it. And the challenge right now is that during COVID-19, most restaurants and food and beverage entities, whilst relying on home delivery, lost out on bulk of their in-store dining, where most restaurants operate between anything from 60 to 80% in-store dining, around 30%, some restaurants 40% or less is home delivery. But home delivery is razor thin margins. The aggregator makes all the money. So as soon as you lose that big chunk of profitable money, you start to deplete reserves. And in the industry, I mean, Google will tell you this, most food and beverage entities operate between 18 days to 30 days cash, 30 days if you're lucky. Wow. So the first thing you've got to do is to preserve that 18 days of cash. And every day you pay people, every day you pay somebody something without having income in, you're running out of cash. So you've got to make some very difficult decisions. And these could involve laying off staff, sadly, unfortunately, telling your landlords you're not going to pay your rent, cutting overhead as much as possible so you can preserve cash when things get back to normal.
Sure. Now, 2 years ago, you mentioned in an interview the possibility of expanding into new territories, possibly KSA as well, in a joint venture with Naya Farajhi Investments. Can you share with us a little bit more on that project or what might be going on?
Yeah, it's very exciting. Look, we were very, very excited about going to Saudi Arabia with Naya Farajhi. It's been an absolute pleasure working with their team. They've been thorough professionals. I'm really excited that they're going to do so much justice to the brand. I'm very confident they're going to roll out a plan. We have technically a 15-store plan, so very, very excited about that. The first store will open in Riyadh. Hopefully, depending on how things go with COVID-19. I understand the lockdown is ending in Saudi Arabia, which is I guess good news. But hopefully sometime at the beginning of Q4, if not before. So it's very, very exciting. We're busy hiring, we're busy organizing the supply chain. As you know, we have a lot of exclusive products that have to be shipped in and brought in, translations, halal certification. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that we have to do. So yeah, very, very, very exciting.
All right. Now, speaking about exciting things, over the years, you've had your fair share of interesting, or let's call them high-profile customers that have been to Jones the Grocer. Can you share some of those names with us, or some of the high-profile individuals that shop from your stores?
Yeah, look, I'm not, you know, we obviously don't, as I said to you, a lot of word of mouth. We never really talk about this actively. But now that you ask, you know, we've had Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed comes in very often. He's a regular customer, and we're really privileged and proud to have him in store. And he brings, you know, a variety of guests with him. We've had, you know, everybody from Tony Blair to amazing Bob Geldof, who I'm a big fan of, with Live Aid. You know, remember Live Aid? You know, I'm a big fan of his. And then you've got people like Kevin Rudd, Prime Minister. We've got Hillary of Australia some time back. Hillary Clinton, who I had the pleasure of you know, meeting as well personally. We had Mohammed bin Salman, Prince Mohammed bin Salman in, and so we've had really had our fair share of people coming in. The UAE cabinet even had a meeting there at our store once. So they all the sheikhs of the Emirates got together there. So it was been a real privilege having these kind of people come to our store and serving them. And you know, I'm honored because of that.
Now, that's one thing that I've noticed from speaking to you in the past is you do pay quite a lot of attention to detail, and you know, being myself guilty of it, some people do not really analyze things to that point. And that brings me to the next point, which is audits. I know that you've been quite thorough, not just with maintaining the levels of customer service standards and the brand across the branches, but in general, you guys have a system in place for auditing and quality assurance. Can you tell our viewers or audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've recently digitized everything. So we have a little tablet that our senior team go with when they visit partners. And we've developed, you might say, systemized our operation system to an extent where we've translated the key indicators that we want our partners to perform to into a checklist. And assuming the partner has been trained, which is always the case, for example, in the case of Saudi Arabia, we know that that partner will be trained. We like to do our training face to face. So that's one of the challenges of COVID-19, is that we really want to be able to fly there, or them to come to us so we can do face to face training. You can't really train somebody on Zoom necessarily to how to talk to a customer, how to serve them, you know, a drink, whatever it is. You really need to be in front. I mean, the best way is face-to-face interaction. So we're hoping once we've got the face-to-face training out of the way, the manuals have been studied and taught, we then have a tablet. In the tablet, we have all the key indicators, and our team members would go there and do a full audit. The audit would be, this applies to our own stores as well. So it's not as if it's happening just to those guys. We look at the front of house of the business. We look at, you know, everything from how the tables are laid, whether the floor is clean, whether the signage is clean. All these things which have been trained are audited and scored. And likewise, back of house, which is the kitchen, for us, we would do a taste test on a selection of recipes. We would look at how it's being plated. We would look at social media reviews. We would look at all of this stuff through community listening, and then based on that, there'd be an audit score, and then there'd be a rectification system should there be a problem, and a time period given for the store to fix that. And that's what happens across our business in all our stores.
Well, you definitely seem like you are taking full advantage of technology today, and obviously with all the digital transformation taking place, technology is a big part. How much would you say you rely on technology in your operations, or for the viewers, for people running their businesses today, how much should they actually rely on technology versus manual operations?
Somebody said that COVID-19 jump-started technology by 3 years in 3 months. So I would argue that we have actually come forward at least a year and a half, if not more, in the last 3 months with the use of technology. You know, our website, for example, our e-com, all the aggregator business that we've developed. We've actually even set up direct delivery from our stores to, you know, without using aggregators, having our own portal to try and capture some of the delivery market rather than pay 25-30% to Talabat or Uber Eats. We're using handheld tablets in store to take orders. We've always done that, but now we've optimized them so they're much faster, much quicker, so our waiters can save less time, spend more time with the customer and less time punching orders and things like that. We've got QR code menus now for COVID-19. So the whole business now, you just walk into store with your mobile phone, you scan your QR code and the menu pops up on your handheld and you can place the order. You don't have to even pick up a menu. So we've done a lot of this stuff literally in the last 6 weeks. It's been an incredible learning experience.
Okay. Now, in summary, as we get closer to the Q&A session, for everybody who's watching, and again, a lot of business owners today within the field of food and beverage have been going through some difficult times, whether it's for COVID-19 or other elements. What are your top 3 takeaways or advice, tips that you can actually provide our viewers today?
Look, in this environment, the first thing is you need to focus on your business. It's very easy to get distracted. It's very easy to look at what other people are doing. It's very easy to find another shoulder to cry on because everybody's struggling. I think it's really, really important to just focus on your business, your team, your employees, and try and find the best solution for your business for it to survive. So that's the first thing. And you need that focus, because if you get distracted, that your focus completely disappears.
Sure.
The second I think the second important point would be, obviously, as I said earlier, focus on cost. I think in the end, what makes or breaks a business in such an environment, whether it's competition, whether it's COVID-19, is losing control of your costs and making sure your costs remain. And the third thing is, you can cut staff, you can cut costs, but you've also got to manage your customer service standards. And the mistake a lot of people make is don't assess talent before cutting cost. So before you cut cost, assess talent. Try and figure out who the multitaskers in the business are. Who are the guys who can do 5 things at the same time? Who are the guys who can walk into a store, talk to a customer, sell somebody an amazing hamper, gift hamper or something, and at the same time walk into the kitchen and help out if need be? Who are those guys? If you make sure you keep those guys in the business and try and multitask, so you can actually survive through these kind of difficult times.
All right, excellent. Now, we are going to go to our Q&A session. We've had quite a few questions that have poured in from the audience. So the first question that we have comes from Khalid Arabia, and he messages from Saudi Arabia and says, how do you manage stock since it may go bad? In other words, I guess the message here is, how do you manage your stock and control wastage?
So, look, when you first open your business, it's very, very hard to set a wastage yardstick. You will find the wastage number later down the line, perhaps 3 weeks, 2 weeks down the line. The general yardstick for wastage can vary anything between 0.5%, 1%, up to 2%. But you hardwire that into your pricing. So when you price when you do your cost card, you will build in wastage. Okay, and then you've got to monitor wastage. But answering the question very directly in terms of the pre-opening and the opening phase, you will have a lot more wastage. You might even have 10%. You might even have 5%. You might have 15%, because you'll be giving away free samples, doing all this kind of stuff. But eventually your wastage should settle down somewhere at the percentage point you've programmed into your cost card. And you've got to monitor that. You've got to have wastage checking. You've got to have sheets. And the chefs have to record and log things that are thrown away. You've got to do weekly, daily stock takes in the kitchen to manage your wastage, so you fully understand what you're actually consuming to what you're actually recording.
Next question comes in from Faisal Al-Khulabi, and he says, and he's messaging from Saudi Arabia, says, what are the operational risks when opening a restaurant?
Oh God, what could go wrong? So much. Could be anything. Could be. One of the big ones is understaffing. A lot of people, again, do a business plan. They don't necessarily plan their staffing and their costs correctly. It's very, very important, in my opinion, to overstaff when you open a store. It's much easier to lose people than to gain people quickly. You know, and so that would be my number one tip, other than having a flawed business plan that hasn't been sense checked thoroughly. You know, you have to understand your costs and you have to sense check them and proof them. But that aside, I think having the right team, well trained and somewhat overstaffed for the opening is always the right thing to do. I think that would be my tip.
Okay. Next question comes from Ili Nujaim. He messages from Lebanon and says, what are the best practices when engaging with food influencer partnerships?
Oh God, that's like $1 million question. So if you talk to my CFO, his view generally is that we should try and do it for as little cost as possible or no cost, you know, some sort of a barter system. Then, you know, you have other people who might turn around and say that, you know, you've got to pay for it. And you've got to, you know, to get the best influencers, you've got to pay top dollar. Sure. I think it's a very difficult thing. I think everybody thinks they can be influencers. I would say the best way to do this is to look at micro influencing, where you have smaller bloggers who have, let's say, 8,000-10,000 followers. A lot of them will work with you for very small sum of money or for barter. And you might get a much more active, engaged audience with the micro bloggers than some of the big guys. But, you know, if you have the big budget to go out there and get some of these big bloggers, then, you know, hey, why not? But my view would be that for most startups, identify the 6,000 to 10,000 influencer, work out a deal that makes sense, ideally a barter deal. If there's no barter deal available, then a small cost. You know, you could give them food for 6 months or something and get some really good value out of that. Sure. Work out a deal that makes sense, and make sure you look at his audience and see how engaged they are, particularly in your brand or your type of food.
All right, fair enough. We'll take the last two questions here. So Lina Al Mulhim asks, how do I deal with competitors?
Oh, you've got to watch them. I think competition is healthy. I think a lot of people get stressed out with competition. I think you need competition to keep you on your toes. I think if you didn't have competition, life would be boring. You know, you'd become stated. You know, that's why monopolies are monopolies. That's why it's always better to be in the private sector than the government sector, because government sectors create monopolies. So my view would be is that competition is healthy, it's good. You need to watch them. You need to see what they're doing, learn from them, and see if you can do it better. Try not to copy them. Try and do it better, differently, and win your customer in a way that is better than them. That would be my advice there.
Right. You did mention at one point in a previous discussion when we were talking about the importance of customer service versus the quality, and you gave me an analogy or an example of one of them being the priority for business owners to look after. So, for example, if the food is great but the service is bad, people might come back, whereas vice versa, that might not be the case. And I found that to be very interesting. Can you run us through that very quickly before we wrap things up?
I'm a real believer that if your food is good, really good, people forgive service to a degree. I'm not saying that's, you know, so I would always go back, and most of my friends and people that I know would always go back to a restaurant where the food is really good, or they'll get it delivered home. Okay, even if the service is not as good or slightly shoddy, or could be better, you know, the sort of could be better mark. Okay, but if the service is good but the food is awful, chance of me going back or anybody going back is fairly low. So I think I don't want to pick things here, but I would say getting the food right is paramount. Getting the service right is number two, but it still needs to obviously be there. But you've got to get the food right, because that is why people come to a restaurant. Yes, they come for great service, but service doesn't necessarily mean people will come back. People will come back because of the food and then the service. I believe that's the way I see it.
Sure. Well, Mr. Siddiqui, I really want to take a minute to thank you for giving us your time. Again, we've got so many people joining us today from all over the world, people who are passionate about either entering the space or people who are in this space, some who might be succeeding, some who might be looking for answers. So we certainly appreciate all the answers that you have shared with us today, and hopefully they will be beneficial for our audience. I also want to take a minute as we conclude this interview to thank all of our viewers for tuning in today from all around the world. Most importantly, I'd like to take a moment to thank the amazing team at Naif Al-Rajhi Investments for putting this platform together and making this possible. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in. That was Mr. Siddiqui, the owner and CEO of Jones the Grocer. My name is Omar, signing off, and we hope to see you in the next session.